2022 NBA trade deadline is just 22 days away, and we've only had one significant midseason trade so far. But if there's one thing we know, the NBA always delivers. It doesn't matter if it's the draft, free agency, or the trade deadline, this league always gives us plenty of that sweet, sweet content. With that in mind, I wanted to prepare for this year's trade deadline the best way I know how, by running through some realistic scenarios in the NBA trade machine for the top potential targets of this year's deadline. This video will not include any Ben Simmons trades. We begin with arguably the best available player at the deadline this year, truly available. There's no Damian Lillard, there's no Bradley Beal, Domantas Sabonis. In this scenario, he is going to Charlotte in exchange for Ish Smith, Mason Plumlee, James Bouknight, and a 2022 first-round pick from New Orleans. So let's set the stage here. The Indiana Pacers are bad. They are legitimately one of the worst basketball teams in the league. Yes, they've had health issues, they have had a variety of issues, but overall, they're just not very good, and it's clear that they are in need of a new direction. Now, there have been some conflicting reports lately on what ownership would like to do after we got that report from The Athletic, what feels like months ago, about the Pacers looking to rebuild by trading either Sabonis, Turner, or Karis LeVert. Now, Turner, as we now know, is going to be undergoing some injury rehab, and so it's unlikely he's going to be available at the deadline, which should also just further initiate some trade conversations for Indiana, because they're going to be just that much worse without Turner. So Sabonis ends up on a team in Charlotte that is actually very good. They're very interesting, they're very fun, but for the entirety of what feels like the last decade, they have needed a five-man, and I think that's where Sabonis fits in. I know that he's played plenty of time at the four alongside Turner, but I think especially against smaller units, he will be an absolutely devastating five. Defensively, there's absolutely going to be some problems there. But quite frankly, if you're the Hornets, one of the big goals here should just be to be a really fun team. You've got LaMelo, you've got Rozier, you've got Gordon Hayward, you can add Sabonis. You can just be a really fun, high-flying, high-scoring team. And Sabonis gives you a different punch to throw. He allows you to do other things offensively. And the idea of him in Charlotte is really exciting to me. On the other hand, for Indiana, you're getting some expirings in Plumlee and Smith, and then you get two things that could be an asset moving forward. This Pelicans pick, and then James Bouknight, who hasn't really gotten any run for Charlotte, which is concerning. However, you could turn him into a nice guard down the road. I understand that this is not an incredible amount of value for a player in Sabonis that is a legitimate all-star. But when you consider the position that he plays, which is not considered to be incredibly valuable, and the fact that you really could be buying low on a significant asset in Bouknight, a player that was drafted highly in this most recent draft, I think this is pretty fair compensation for Indiana. Now, if Charlotte decides that this is not a move that they want to make, I would understand that completely, because even though they're not giving up a ton, maybe this isn't their time to make a move. Maybe they want to wait out the Bouknight thing a little longer, and they don't have their own pick this year as well, which would leave them without a first-round pick this upcoming offseason. We move on to another front court player, and it's a player in Philadelphia. It's Ben Simmons. I'm kidding, it's not Ben Simmons. It's Tobias Harris. In this scenario, he is going to Dallas along with Andre Drummond in exchange for Tim Hardaway Jr., Dwight Powell, and Jalen Brunson. The idea here for Philadelphia is you need perimeter players desperately. Tyrese Maxey is a nice player. Seth Curry is fun. You need perimeter guys that can create, and you really don't need any more forwards. Embiid is as dominant of a five-man as a front court player that we have in the league. He's arguably playing the best out of any player in the entire league right now, and all you need to pair him with is spacing and perimeter creation and defense. And Tobias Harris really doesn't provide that much of any of those things. He's not particularly great at any one of those things. He's fine at each of them, and maybe you can convince Dallas that what they need is a real legitimate offensive player alongside Luka and KP that they can sell as their big three moving forward that fits at least relatively decently alongside KP. So even though you could argue that Philly is giving up the best player in this deal, which generally is something that teams try to avoid, Brunson really helps them, Tim Hardaway really helps them from a spacing standpoint, and then Powell replaces those Andre Drummond minutes at the five. Powell has to be there because of salary reasons. From the Mavericks perspective, I kind of laid out the case a little bit earlier, but if you're just looking for a legitimate third guy to put alongside KP, to put alongside Luka, maybe Tobias Harris is that guy. Yes, you're losing spacing in Tim Hardaway Jr., and everybody loves Jalen Brunson. But you're going to have to pay Jalen Brunson in the offseason. There's question marks around what that would mean for him this offseason as an unrestricted free agent. And maybe just getting something out of him now, even if that something is Harris, is a pretty decent idea. We move on now to one of the more interesting trade targets of this deadline season, and that is Buddy Hield of the Sacramento Kings. In this scenario, he goes to Cleveland, one of my favorite up-and-coming teams of the season this year in exchange for Ricky Rubio's expiring contract, Dylan Windler, and a top 10 protected pick from Cleveland. So here's what you're thinking if you're the Cavs. You already made a move to try and replace Ricky Rubio after he got hurt in bringing in Rajon Rondo. And there's been some things being thrown around right now about the possibility of using Rubio's expiring contract in a trade. Typically, players cannot be traded when they are hurt, but there are exceptions to that. And the Cavs might be willing to look into some of those things if they can get a player back like Hield in exchange for Rubio's expiring and some other assets. Windler isn't a super significant piece in my opinion, and if you're Cleveland and you really think you have a chance at a top 5, a top 4 seed in the Eastern Conference this year, that feels like something that you need to gravitate towards. Hield is under contract for the next couple of seasons, provides really good spacing, is not going to get in the way of Darius Garland. He's going to be able to space off the ball for him, and could potentially be a relatively long-term backcourt partner alongside Garland if you decide to move on from Colin Sexton in the offseason. For the Kings, at this point, it is just about getting some kind of value in exchange for Hield, who is obviously no longer part of the future plans for Sacramento. They have a ton of other guards, a ton of other young players they're trying to figure out what to do with, and Hield has been available for what feels like forever, especially going back to this most recent offseason in which he almost went to the Lakers. Maybe you can turn Windler into some kind of asset, you get out of the money of Buddy Hield, and then that pick from Cleveland could absolutely be in the lottery if they start to slip a little bit, or worst case, it's probably going to be in the teens somewhere, which will help you continue to add to the talent nucleus here in Sacramento. The biggest issue is this just kind of goes away from Sacramento's idea this year of really pushing for the postseason, but if things start to go poorly prior to the deadline, I wouldn't be surprised to see them start dumping some players like Hield. Second to last now is our most just shake it up trade. In this scenario, the Celtics are sending Marcus Smart and a couple of second-round picks to Atlanta in exchange for Bogdan Bogdanović. First, let's talk about this for Atlanta, because I think it might be the most head-scratching half of this trade. I'm thinking about who's a good player to pair alongside Trae Young, who can guard, who can space decently depending on the game. There's certainly some inconsistency shooting-wise for Marcus Smart, but he can space in certain games. But most importantly, he's going to be a nice defensive guard to put alongside Trae Young, so you can always hide him no matter what. No offense to guys like Kevin Huerter, but they're just not on the same level defensively of what Marcus Smart can be in the right situation. You're moving on from Bogdanović partially because of his contract situation coming up. He's another guy that they're going to need to pay. They've already thought about that possibility in terms of moving someone like Cam Reddish to get out of the money. Smart is signed long-term on a number that makes a decent amount of sense, and you just don't have to worry about it. And even if you did, it's not the most difficult contract of all time to move down the road. Now for Boston, they finally make the move to get rid of Marcus Smart and send him somewhere else, and that's their real shake-up piece on this roster. The reason Bogdanović is going to Boston is because they really need some perimeter playmaking. They need someone that can work in ball screens, that can space off the ball as well, but can work around Tatum and Brown so much better than what Smart was. And Smart wants to be that guy. He wants to be the playmaker. He wants to be a true point guard. And Bogdanović isn't a true point guard either. But in terms of a perimeter playmaker, he's significantly better, significantly more explosive in that area than Smart, and probably ends up being a much better fit in Boston, certainly from an offensive standpoint. This is a tricky one because these are two teams that are going in very weird directions right now, but I like this one a lot. And last up now, we once again talk about Sacramento, and it's De'Aaron Fox going to Toronto, along with Marvin Bagley in exchange for Pascal Siakam. I got to set the stage here, a little bit of context. So in this scenario, Sacramento starts to look pretty good towards the trade deadline, and they want to capitalize on that. They really desperately want to make the postseason this year. It's their one main goal. They're tired of having the longest playoff drought in the league. They want to make the playoffs, and that is what this move has in mind. While for Toronto, yes, they've been playing better lately, but if you start to look more towards the long term in terms of adding young assets to this team, De'Aaron Fox and Marvin Bagley are two players that they absolutely can reform and turn into really good players moving forward. Maybe you look for more assets in exchange for Siakam, but that's kind of the baseline level we're working with here. For the Kings, this allows them to really open up their backcourt and prioritize Tyrese Halliburton, prioritize Davion Mitchell. If they keep Buddy Hield, he can stick around a little bit better here as well in this new nucleus, and Siakam gives them a legitimate front court go-to scorer, providing some interesting lineup combinations alongside Harrison Barnes if Siakam wants to play the 5. They move on from the Bagley situation as a whole and capitalize on the little bit of value he has built lately. All those things sound like positive things for Sacramento if they really want to push for the postseason. Now, honestly, I think the sell here is a little bit more difficult for Toronto because Siakam's a good player and he's been a part of some good teams there. The biggest issue is just the contract for me long term. I'm not convinced that he's ever going to be worth that number, but I am convinced that maybe Toronto is the place that De'Aaron Fox becomes what he really has the talent and potential to be, and that's one of the best two-way backcourt players in the entire league. There's not really a player other than Scotty Barnes on this Toronto roster that really shows that kind of potential. And I think given the development program they have in place there, their ability to really bring along these guards especially, I think Fox is a cool fit. And who knows, maybe they're the team to turn around Marvin Bagley as well. With all those things said, my name is Tucker. Hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.